ready, hit the record button, and we'll be going here in 5, 4, 3, 2.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Scott M. Graves, and I am your host for another exciting episode of SMG's Are We Here Yet podcast. Super excited to be here. Setting the stage a little bit. It is snowy outside tonight, but we are all snug as a bug in a rug here at the SMG home studios, literally home studios.
Right.
With us, as always, laughing away there in the background with Dave Grohl staring down at us from on high, is our producer and my co-host, Cam McLeod. What's up, brother?
Hey. I'm good, man. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm kind of like a little excited because it's like a snow day tomorrow.
Right. Tomorrow will be fun.
School. They've called virtual school.
Oh wow, really?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess that's would be a nice change of pace for the students at home. See, I don't have to deal with that at all anymore. So
yes, our fair city in this nestled in this little part of Massachusetts, we actually, the teachers have to go physically to school to teach the virtual classes. So
oh, interesting.
that's part of the reason why. Yeah. Interesting.
Well, good for them. Good. They need a break. So
that's right.
It's well deserved.
That's right. Yeah. With us tonight in the home studio, I'm going to introduce her right now. We have Morgan Bondry, who is manager of the day program at a very special place here in our part of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the Quabbin Retreat. Quabbin Retreat is located in Petersham, Massachusetts. Or if you are like hyper local to this area, it's Petersham.
Petersham.
I didn't realize until after I left the Commonwealth in the years I used to tour the country that everyone was like, Petersham. Oh, I've seen that little town. Yeah, it's a great little town down there. Petersham. You'd be like, what are you talking about? But if you're from around here, it's Petersham. Morgan, welcome to the SMG studios.
Thank you. Good to be here tonight.
Thank you for coming.
We're very happy to have you here. And you know, a serious topic this evening. We are talking about the services that the Quabbin Retreat offers, and more broadly, the general sense for the state of mental health here in our neck of the woods in the 21st century. So we're very happy to have you here tonight.
Thank you.
Could you just start off helping our listeners visualize? Tell us a little bit about your background, and then also sort of set the stage for the Quabbin Retreat itself and what happens there, and actually what kind of it's a peaceful place in a
peaceful
small rural town.
Yep. I'm a licensed mental health counselor. I'm licensed in both Rhode Island and in Massachusetts. I'm also a licensed addiction and drug counselor from the state of Massachusetts through the Department of Public Health, BSAS, the Bureau of Substance and Addiction Services. Okay. I've been at Quabbin Retreat since 2014, and I've been program manager there for the last couple of years. I manage the day treatment program there, as opposed to the residential program, which is run by McLean Hospital, but also on our campus. We're both substance abuse treatment programs. We handle folks from people who are very newly sober, newly clean, to folks who are working toward being clean, to folks who need a little bit more help. Our day treatment program runs for about 3.5 hours, 5 days a week. And I have licensed clinicians who also run the groups who are part of that program. We're primarily substance abuse, but we also deal with mental health, behavioral health issues along with the substance abuse, because they usually go hand in hand.
Right.
You can't usually have one without the other. Right. And our program has been running for a couple of years now.
Talk to us a little bit about that very phenomenon. And what I'm talking specifically to is the multi-layered issues that occur for people. It's a very organic process, right? Both getting into an addiction and everything that's coupled with that. And then of course, getting out of it, you're dealing with these multiple layers. And sometimes there is a diagnosed mental health issue, right? Or it's undiagnosed, and all the other societal factors. Maybe if you can break down a bit of the complication of that for people listening, because I don't think a lot of people really grasp that aspect of addiction.
Well, the thing with addiction too is that it's so multi-layered, like you said, and you can look on it on a global scale, on a large brushstroke kind of thing, or you can go down into very minute issues of why someone is addicted, how someone is addicted. A lot of it stems from folks needing to get treatment and can't find treatment and start to self-medicate. A lot of times they'll start with alcohol to calm down at night or to relax themselves. Sometimes they're introduced to marijuana. Sometimes they've been introduced to prescription opiates from an injury that just continued to be prescribed, that became an addiction. People enter the substance abuse world from a lot of different areas, and they can access treatment from a lot of different areas too. There's a concept among addiction treatment that every door is the right door to go in, whether you go to a fire station and say, hey, I'm really scared, I don't like what's going on with me, whether you're arrested and you enter the criminal justice system and get treatment while you're in jail, whether you're referred by your doctor to a treatment facility, to a counselor, that sort of thing. People come to us in a lot of different ways for a lot of different reasons. But the main problem underlying all of that is they got themselves in a jam. They were trying to help themselves out and they got stuck.
Right. But even then, it's, I mean, you could have injured yourself. They gave you opiates and it started you on a path to addiction because of the class of drug they're giving you. But at the same time, it's not just that physical injury that might have been the problem that got you into addiction. You could have you can have a diagnosed mental health issue that is spiraling out of control, or you have an anxiety issue stemming from some kind of abuse. That abuse might be ongoing at the time you injured yourself. The injury might be a sports injury from school, but you might have other things. So all of these different touch points work in combination to create the problem for the person before they're even addicted.
Exactly. Which is why when they come to us, when we do an assessment of someone who comes through our doors, we conduct what we call a biopsychosocial assessment. We look at the biology, we look at the psychology, we look at the social aspects of their situation to figure out why or what contributed to get them where they are and what we need to put in place to get them out of where they are.
Right.
Where your manager of a day program in a static location, you a moment ago mentioned all of these different ways in which people might come to a program. Are you from your place in the ecosystem of this, are you having to create pathways externally to capture people, to have them to be a part of the program? Or is it the rest of the greater world? Law enforcement finds that person, they happen to be in the right zip code, that's how they get to you. The hospital, people come into the hospital for some other reason, then they start talking about the addiction problem they have, they end up coming to, how is it that they end up coming to that one static place like a Quabbin retreat?
It's very similar to almost any other business model that you might be talking about. It's networking and it's connections. The more visible our program is, the more people across the Commonwealth and in our little North Quabbin area know that we're available, the more folks are able to refer to us. We've gotten referrals from probation officers, from the police, from fire departments. We've gotten referrals from hospitals, from doctors. They come to us in a lot of different ways, but the key is one of the things that we hear a lot from the people who are referring to us are, I didn't know you folks were there. And that breaks my heart because it's so important that they know that we're here so that people can access the system through us. Sometimes we're not the best level of care for the folks who come to us, but at least we can be an entry to the whole substance abuse treatment genre across the state and help them get to where they need to go. But in order for folks to come to us, they have to know that we're there.
Right.
That brings up this interesting conundrum, if you want to call it that, because we're having this conversation right now, you and I, Morgan, and I, in my head, I'm placing the Quabbin retreat, this physical place for a moment, in the same category as the fire station, the library, the police station, within any municipality, with any community of people. within any ecosystem of people. It's like on the short list of places that you want to know that like you said, you want to know that it's there, because you never know when you're going to need that service, because it's an essential service. And yet, when you really think about it culturally, places like the Quabbin Retreat have always been, you know, what is that over there? And nobody really seems to know about it. Right. Nobody wants to talk about it. Is this like sort of the vestige of a time in the past where even if it was, you know, like some of the asylums created in the 19th century just outside of a major city like Boston, you know, it'd be hiding in plain sight almost, right? Is it a vestige of that we tend to somehow be, even if we're not readily shamed by the existence of a place that delivers mental health services, they're still not on that list of like the fire station, the police station, the library. You know what I'm saying?
I think what you're talking about is stigma, and the fact that it shouldn't be there, but it really is there. The stigma of someone who's dealing with a mental health issue or a substance abuse issue. We spend a lot of time with our patients, our clients, talking about, well, if you had high blood pressure, you would go and get it treated. If you broke your leg,
you know where it is,
you would go and get it treated. If you are having a problem with alcohol, with drugs, where do you go to get it treated? And until our society and our culture gets to the point of dealing with behavioral health and substance abuse on the same par as we deal with physical health, we're still going to be dealing with this not in my backyard kind of mentality. We're very fortunate, though, because we're connected. We're one of the 3 campuses of the Haywood healthcare system. And Haywood has a really strong connection with community in the Athol, in the Gardner, in the Peter Sam area. And a lot of people know Haywood, and as they get to know us better, they are more comfortable referring to us as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
The paint a picture for us of the people coming to your facility. Are they overwhelmingly from the local area? I mean, who are they? And I mean, the short answer I imagine would be any one of us can find ourselves. I went way back in high school. We had a psychology course that we would, as an elective, and I remember a very kind man taught this class, Mr. Lavoie, and one of the first things he would say to everybody is, what I want you to walk away with in this, you know, introductory level course is that all of us are one step away. And I don't mean this in a morbid way, but we are simply all of us at any given time, one step away from a massive mental health issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if you took that to heart as a young person, which is hard to do when you're 18 or 17, but then you become an adult and you interact in the greater world. And that makes, there's a tremendous amount of meaning in that.
Yeah, there is. You ask who are our patients, and it really is anyone that you pass on the street, anyone that you might see in your family, anyone that you might encounter in your workplace, because it's not, they say it all the time, is it's not a particular social strata that gets into trouble with addiction. It could be anyone, and it could be anywhere. It's not a respecter of person. It's not a respecter of role. It's not a respecter of socioeconomic class. Literally anyone and everyone are our patients, depending on where they are in life. And it's an interesting mix when we put a group together, because a lot of our treatment is done in a group setting. And you can have professionals, you can have medical professionals, you can have lawyers, you can have kids off the street, you can have folks who have been homeless, but they're all part of the same group because they're all dealing with similar issues. And you would think that it would be, oh, I'm not going to talk to you, or you're not going to have anything to add to talk to my life experience. But the reality and the magic that happens in a group treatment is that they learn from each other, they connect to each other, and it's amazing how they support each other. Doesn't matter where they're coming from, they're all in this together in this particular point in time.
I've got to imagine that kind of real-time the breaking down of socioeconomic barriers,
Mhm.
all of that dynamic that could be going on in a group setting like that. I mean, I can understand why that would help heal people, because that kind of breaking down, regardless of where it happens, it could be a bunch of musicians on a stage,
Oh,
it could
gosh.
be people in treatment. You garner a certain perspective and a certain wisdom that it creates harmony, it reduces anxiety. You break down all these things that keep you thinking you have to be on this pedestal that becomes increasingly more and more fragile, because you're trying to hide something, or you're trying to deal with something that is spiraling out of control in your life. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
You paint an excellent picture of that sort of happening. I wasn't expecting that to be something that was brought up, but
yeah. It's a persona. We all walk around with a persona, and a lot of times it's a healthy persona, but sometimes we can get trapped behind it, and we're not able to ask for help. When you talk about people going through an experience, I'm old enough to remember the blizzard of '78, or when you go through 9/11, or when you go through what we just went through in our political realm. When people go through something that is traumatic or earth-shaking or life-altering together, it forms a stronger bond. And addiction treatment is the same kind of a thing. When you go through addiction treatment together, you form a very strong bond, because you're all in this place you didn't want to be, but there you are. And who else would understand better than someone else who's also going through it?
Right. Right.
I've got to imagine that times like the ones we're in, they're not the cause of various forms of either addiction or, mental health issues, but they must aggravate certain problems for a wider range of people.
Sure.
I mean, we hear all the time of the liberalization of opiates in the last 30 years has had the expected results that we should have thought of, right? But I'm actually getting more at, we here in this region that we're both speaking of, deindustrialization, especially for some of the mill towns just east of the North Quabbin region, it didn't come 150 years ago. It came like 15 years ago or 20 years ago. And I've got to imagine that those economic phenomenon had a profound effect on people, their capacity to deal in a positive way with the stresses that come from that, especially since a lot of the socioeconomic issues that resulted of that, the fallout. But there was also cultural issues too, because we are a nation that often perceives value in certain segments of our population only by what they can produce.
Yeah.
And
what
suddenly,
you do rather than who
your
you
capacity was greatly reduced, right? I mean, at one point in time, this little smallest city in the Commonwealth, Gardner, Massachusetts, was among the highest for the rates of suicide among certain age groups of adult males.
Yeah. It's a hopelessness. It's a feeling of hopelessness. It's a feeling of being stuck. It's a feeling of not knowing where to turn, or when you turn to providers, not being able to get the care that you're looking for any number of reasons. And a lot of it is the stigma of asking for help for a mental health issue. I don't want to admit that I have a problem. And a lot of times when they go and they talk to their physician, to their primary care physician or their physician's assistant or whoever they see for primary care, that's a lot of times the entree to the behavioral health substance abuse system. Is the doc is the one who notices, hey, there's a problem here. And that's when the referrals come.
Well, just even that point, like the stigma of admitting that you have an issue, it's right. That's always the first step. Like if you look at an AA type scenario, like the 12-step program, that's always the first thing, right? Admitting that there's the issue there. Otherwise, you can't truly start that process, that healing process, because you don't acknowledge the wound there. And would you say that's the biggest the step? Because that's what.
Well, this is the entrepreneur culture. Even though we're not helping entrepreneurs like we should at the local level, I mean, to say, this is the fake it till you make it culture, right? Mm. But when you pull that into your personal life, you're isolating yourself. It's basically and the whole culture of pick yourself up by the bootstraps.
Yeah. Mm.
It's so damaging to one's mental health.
Well, it's the image, right, of I can do it on my own. The rugged individualist, the image
which
that
never existed, by the way.
Right.
Excuse me. I'm sorry, what did you just say?
I said, but which never existed, by the way. It's all mythology, right? Like the West was won by farmers who banded together in communities, and they're the ones that survived. If you went out in the middle of the prairie on your own, you know, some kind of deprivation usually got you, man. You know what I mean? Like, it's just mythology, but it's so damaging.
But really, our reality sometimes is based on the myths that we tell ourselves and the stories that we tell ourselves. And if we tell ourselves that I am lesser for admitting that I have a problem, then that's a barrier right there to treatment, is I'm not going to be comfortable asking for help, right, because the myth says I shouldn't have to ask for help. Right, I should be able to do it on my own.
Becomes like self-fulfilling prophecy, yes, at that point, because you just, yep, keep telling yourself this, right, that it's, oh, I'm not going to get better, nothing's going to get better. So then that's what you believe, because that's what, yeah, you keep saying to yourself.
There are so many routes to getting better, that's one of the myths that I really want to bust, is that there are so many routes to getting better, even in a hardcore addiction, that, you know, hopelessness should not be one of the things that you're tussling with.
I'm glad you brought that up too. It was specifically this idea of hopelessness. It's not the drug. The drug is the tool, right? It's it's having this belief that there is no longer any hope, and therefore I'm not worth this effort, and the people around me aren't worth the effort, and that's what leads somebody to say, you know, you pick your poison, right? Whatever, yeah, that, yeah, addiction or negative behavior ends up becoming.
And the minute that you start thinking hopeless, or thinking about what you've done or what you might have done to get your drug or whatever, then shame enters into it, yeah, and it becomes a vicious cycle.
Right.
Is everything we're talking about, especially the idea of the isolation, that these cultural flags that worsen things, is this an American problem? Is it a Western culture problem? Or is this a human behavior problem that's as old as human behavior?
Well, I think the components are as old as human behavior, right? It, mm-hmm, may manifest in a different way, in a different culture, in a different time period. But I think the underlying emotions of hopeless, of fear, of shame, the expectations to meet a particular picture of how your life should be rather than how, right, it really is, and the discontinuity between those two, causes the dissonance, and it can cause the pain, and that's when the self-medication comes in.
Yeah,
right.
How are we doing in our region as far as service delivery goes? As an outsider looking in, I see new facilities in various places, and I hear all the time, those of us that are active, as an example, in philanthropic circles, or just engaged citizens and care about these things, not because we're in the industry, but because we care. And so you sort of remember or the remarks you heard or things you read in the paper and magazines and so forth. Is there a deficit of access, and why?
That's a really complicated question. And the answer, of course, is always yes and no. There is a lot of treatment out there, and it's gotten much, much better. The availability of treatment is better. The awareness of the need for treatment is better. There are always going to be some barriers. Insurance, the medical community.
Always get back to the money, man.
Right.
I'll tell you, but it's a very real one.
Yeah.
Our facility happily accepts folks on Mass Health. There are some programs out there that don't. So that is a barrier to treatment. Um, a lot depends on where you are located. Peter Sam is a lovely little town, but Peter Sam doesn't have public transportation coming through the town.
Not at all.
So that can be a barrier to treatment. Ironically, the coronavirus has opened up our availability to do treatment to folks who wouldn't be able to get to us because we've started to do telehealth. I mean, you're doing this interview tonight. I'm in my living room, you're in your living room, and it's working beautifully.
Mm-hmm.
We do the same thing with our treatment, is we're able through Zoom to have the virtual groups. Is it the ideal? No, but we are also able to offer it to more people because of it. So there's the good that comes along with the bad.
Right. That's fair. I was just about to ask that. Have you noticed not just an increase of people coming to your programs now because of, you know, the beauty of Zoom and the pros and cons of it, but would you say are you still getting the same level, or would you say it's more because it's a different platform now, it's kind of still up in the air in terms of if you get the same,
now, are you talking numbers, or are you talking the same population?
Population, I guess, in this case.
Yeah, we are getting the same population. We really are. We're still getting the mix of cultures and of socioeconomic levels and all of that. Surprisingly, the one thing that most people have, regardless of where they are economically, is this little thing. And a smartphone gives you access to treatment.
Right.
Because as long as you have access to a wireless or to an internet service, you can access Zoom and you can access treatment. Awesome. And there are very few people I know who don't have some version of that. And the beauty of Zoom actually is, even if you can't access it through a device, you can access via a telephone. You won't be able to see the pictures, but you can still participate in the group. We've had members come in that way because they just don't have a smartphone. Makes sense. So it really has become actually more of an equalizer by being able to do it virtually than we have had in the past when we were able to bring folks in face-to-face into our program.
See, I'm encouraged to hear you say that, Morgan, because I would have imagined that it would have created more, you know, there's a digital divide, rural versus urban, and that it would have created a worse situation, not better. But then on the other side of that, for those that do have access and do have the internet access to go, the internet service to go along with it, it actually,
it's a benefit.
Does it? Yeah, there's a benefit there, you know?
Yeah. Does the treatment work better face-to-face in a group? Perhaps, but I'm finding fewer barriers doing it via Zoom than I thought we would. And our patients, our clients, seem to be able to connect with each other and with my clinicians just as well via Zoom as they do face-to-face. So that's been a blessing in a really bleak year.
Yeah. Yeah, it is remarkable for all of us that we've been forced to emphasize the digital realm in our communications with each other. It's not perfect, but it's far better than most of us thought.
Yeah, surprisingly so.
Yeah. And you mentioned the bleak year with the political transition we just made with a new administration. Do you anticipate, from a funding standpoint at the national level, maybe from a cultural standpoint, because I feel like in a lot of ways, the problems of addiction, problems of mental health, access to care, access actually to all health care and to health coverage has been in a number of different ways, and in parts of the country, it's gone in the reverse of where we want it to. Is this going to change, do you think? Is it too soon to tell?
I'm hopeful.
We simply don't fund, particularly mental health, the way we should, do we?
Not as well as we could. I think, again, we're talking visibility, we're talking dealing with stigma, we're talking about folks accepting that this is as normal an illness as diabetes, as high blood pressure, as anything else. And the more we work toward normalizing treatment, the more treatment will be available and the more funding for treatment will be available. Is there always going to be a barrier? Probably, but I've seen so much improve just in the years that I've been working in the field that I am hopeful that will continue.
And it must.
It has to. It has to. If we're going to survive as a society, if we're going to survive as a healthy society, physically and mentally, it has to.
Well, it seems to me that even if we flip a switch tomorrow and we deal with the economic issues of our form of global economy, even dealing with some of the non-health related social issues and so forth, this does not eliminate, because these things did not cause mental health issues or issues of addiction, but they've certainly exacerbated them and they've created more problems for people. As we beginning of our discussion sort of started with the multiple layers that sort of start to fill up a person until they have a problem that's spiraling out of control. If they didn't spiral out of control in the first place, one would think that person would have a better chance at being able to handle things. And so, so there's always going to be this need. And I just feel like we have an obligation to each other as a community of humans to optimize that. Otherwise, if people can't see it for the moral issue that it is, it's just wasted talent.
Oh, unbelievably so.
Beautiful people, wonderful people that just can't optimize personally because they're being held down by something that's not their fault.
Yeah. And then you have the folks who are the families around them, the friends, the families around the person with the addiction are the hidden victims as well.
Yes.
Because they're being affected by it. If someone passes away via an overdose or that sort of thing, then you're dealing with the grief of the families and the friends, but they're also stigmatized. They don't feel like they can express their grief the same way as grandpa who had a heart attack.
Right.
I can express my grief that way. It's a double whammy for them, for the families and the friends. It is so complicated, and yet it's so simple. It's a matter of looking at the person in front of you and what can we do to make their life better.
Right.
I'd imagine that so many of the problems, people that come to you with problems, the underlying issues are multi-generational. In other words, there's virtually no family, the reality is, where there's no evidence anywhere within that greater extended family of various abuses of some kind.
Mm-hmm. Abuses, addictions, behavioral health issues. It's all there somewhere. Yeah.
Right.
And then it becomes, the fallout of that becomes generations long of just, ill-conceived behaviors, simply because everyone's kept it quiet and not brought it out in the open and just dealt with it at some point,
You talk about abuse and you talk about the multi-generational aspects of physical abuse or domestic violence and breaking that cycle when somebody says, no, this is how I was raised, and yet I refuse to abuse, even though I have been abused. It takes just that to start turning things around and spiraling up as opposed to spiraling down.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, but of course, when you start living life and the stressors that are just inherent in life start hitting you, the question is, what skills do you have to fall back on to deal with those more challenging moments? And when somebody lacks the problem solving mechanisms, right? And then, so what do you fall back on? If you were hit, it's what you're going to fall back on. If you were abused in some other way, and I include, mental, verbal abuse rather, in that, that's what you fall back on. Yeah.
And if you're very, very lucky, someone will hold out a hand and say, hey, there's help going that way. If you go there, there's help. And it's all a matter of recognizing the problem, being able to see your own process, and then being able to say, well, I can't change everything, but I can change this one thing. and it leads to other things once you start moving. I have a friend who used to say all the time, you can't steer a stopped car. It's always so much easier to steer a moving car. And
Right.
once you start rolling, even if you're rolling very slowly, you can start steering in different directions.
Sure, right? That's a good analogy. I've never really heard of it, but that's
Oh, I've stolen it from him years ago.
And Cam, Cam doesn't have to apologize for this, but he's young enough to probably not remember when you could also buy cars cheaper because they didn't have power steering.
Power steering. That's
Yes.
true.
Because that statement that your friend made really meant something when you had a car without power steering.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
You had to get
Absolutely.
going a little bit. Yeah.
Right. I just got my power steering fixed in my car, and I couldn't live without it. So, quick aside there.
Yeah, there you go. There's too many questions that I have about what it is that you do, because we're always curious here at the podcast about different professions and so forth. What, as a profession, is there a brain drain going on in your discipline? Is it a graying discipline? Do you have any of the pressures as a group of professionals that a lot of other, like education, is in public education? There's a whole host of what you might consider to be downtown business, local, small, independent, business-oriented, graying industries, because the next generation sees the earlier generation struggling, doesn't want to take over the business, doesn't want to go into the industry, that kind of thing. What is the state of that in what I have to imagine right now is a critical moment for the mental health professions to maintain a high level of professionalism, and I would imagine expand in most markets?
Yep. I think I'm encouraged because I'm seeing an awful lot of younger people coming into the business, into the profession. Not as often in your traditional settings, your traditional mental health clinics. An awful lot of licensed practitioners will be going into private practice, but also will be taking a range of insurances. So I find that very encouraging. I also think, like so many other professions, we have to take a step back and look at how we're providing the care. We might not be able to provide the care in the traditional, come to my office and sit down and we'll talk for an hour. Sometimes we're providing emotional first aid, behavioral health first aid, perhaps paraprofessionals coming in to meet people where they are and then moving them on to more licensed professionals. I think it's an industry, it's a profession that's changing, that we're on the cusp of changing, but I think we have to, because our whole culture is changing. We need to be more nimble. We need to be more mobile. And I think, again, we need more access to mental health treatment. It doesn't necessarily have to be the 1 hour psychotherapy visit every week, the way it was traditionally.
Right. That seems to be, that's a sea change, isn't it? I mean, because a lot of the service delivery paradigms have their roots all the way back into the late 19th century, I'd imagine, and that it's pretty much been the same way now for at least 140, 150 years.
Mm-hmm. But it's not working anymore. You're not going to have Freud sitting in an office with someone laying on the couch and psychoanalyzing them for years and years and years and years and years on end. It just doesn't work. Short, extremely well-focused treatment for a number of weeks is a lot of times all that's needed in the behavioral health field. But you have to change how it's delivered. Again, COVID has done an awful lot with telehealth to be able to do treatment in schools with the clinician miles away in their office. There are lots of different things that we can be doing, and there's lots of different things that we have to be doing in order to meet the need where they are.
I've got to imagine it's a good thing across both rural and urban settings, because healthcare delivery, has often been, this is something I think that's very New England specific too, although, you could say the same in the West, but here in New England, what's specific is, we have hospitals that are going out of business in regions that now create an environment where the nearest hospital is 75 miles away.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's troubling in Vermont, in upstate New York, in Western Massachusetts, in places like that, that used to have their own regional hospitals. And the idea of telehealth in general for both mental health, addiction, other service delivery disciplines sounds encouraging, at least for where it's handy, you know, at least so you get to that point where you need a doctor to be there, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And that's why I think we're looking at hybrid systems. There is not going to be one right answer for everything, but the more components we have to be able to offer a menu of options, I think the more successful we're going to be in reaching the most people.
What else? I'm going to hand the mic to you, if you will. What other items have I actually forgotten or not brought up yet that seem to be essential for our listeners to understand? I want to give them a real sense for, you know, for everything good that's happening right here in our neighborhood, things that are needed, you know. Oh, you're gonna have to say that again. We had a connection problem. Oh,
there you are.
Okay. There we go.
Thank you, Zoom. The one downside to it.
We have just demonstrated the downside of telehealth.
Yeah, right.
We did. You know, and you know, I have to tell you, this is maybe the third time in a year that that's actually happened. So thank you, Zoom.
Yeah,
and thank you to the internet.
It happens. Gee, what would I see as something we haven't already talked about? I think we covered a really broad range of topics when it comes to behavioral health and substance abuse. And I think the most important thing to continue, and I continue to reiterate this wherever I have a chance to talk, is that access is important, visibility is important, and just being willing to explore the options of needing treatment is important so that folks would be able to access the treatment that they deserve. They deserve. We deserve to be able to offer that treatment to anyone who's in need. It's idealistic that we're going to hit everybody, but the wider we throw our net, the more folks we're going to be able to help.
The sort of flavor of what you're touching upon is one of human rights and one of dignity and pride.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's a much bigger issue than we're going to touch on right now.
It is, but you know, listen to everyone listening, everyone, and I mean everyone alive, deserves to be loved, deserves to feel like they're part of the greater human community, and needs to know that they deserve, if they are feeling a pain in their life, if they're feeling, you know, that something could be better, that in fact you got to go with your gut.
Agreed.
And reach out. And there's always going to be, so it might be challenging, but you have to keep reaching out until you find the people who care the most and who will help, because they are out there.
They are, and it may not be the first time or the second time or the third time that you reach out, but eventually something's going to click. I've had people sitting in my group saying, I've tried this so many times, and yet this time it feels like a switch got flipped. You have to wait until that switch gets flipped.
Yeah. It's like the ultimate patience and personal demanding of oneself until it happens, right?
Yeah. And being willing to be vulnerable enough to keep trying.
Right. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. I want to thank you for coming on and speaking with us. You've been listening, ladies and gentlemen, to Morgan Bondry, the manager of the day program at the Quabbin Retreat. I'm not sure, can we offer further information about how to get in touch with the Quabbin Retreat? Or
I would love it. Do you have it on your website? Do you want me to give a phone number? What would you do? Maybe yes. I can stand up with a placard. I would love it.
Yeah, you can verbally say it right now. And as many of our regular listeners know, all of the information is also going to be on our episode page for this episode at the SMG's Are We Here Yet website.
Okay. Our number is 978-724-0010. If you're looking online, you look at the Haywood Hospital's substance abuse treatment page, and you can come right to us.
Perfect.
Excellent.
Awesome. Yeah, that'll definitely be up there. Right?
Thank you.
Of course.
Morgan, it's been a pleasure having you here. Thank you. And I hope that you're able to safely and easily dig out tomorrow morning.
Yeah, right.
Yes, well, we live in New England, right? We get used to this. Thank
Right.
you for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you for
And
coming
we're
on.
happy to have you here. As always, Cam McLeod, it's
Good night.
great to see you again.
It's good to see you too. It's good to be here.
We'll do it all over again on Thursday. And folks, once again, all the information about the Quabbin Retreat will be on our episode page for this week's Are We Here Yet podcast. And we hope that everybody out there stays safe and happy and snug as a bug in a rug on this wonderful snowy eve here, February 1st, 2021. Ladies and gentlemen, you have listened to another SMG's Are We Here Yet podcast. Good night.
Good night.